Start recording, so we'll let it do its thing. All right, we'll go ahead and kick this off here. This is kind of a new format for us. In years previous, we've done a security summit. And this year we decided to kind of make it a security track instead and try to feature as many speakers and sessions from all walks of security that we could. And so we've got Ben from Square who's going to start us off and talk about the online payments that Square is doing and how they're securing it and how you can integrate it securely into your site. Then we will have a quick break. Then we're going to run through, Luke and I are going to run through some modules on just some basic security modules that you guys should all be looking out for and what to be integrating, especially as you're starting to look at D7 and D8 migrations and moving more into D8, what's going on there. And then we'll follow it up with kind of a general Q&A on security. If you guys have any generic questions or anything like that, we can run through that as well. So with that, we'll hand it off to Ben and get this started. Thanks.
Hey everyone, my name is Ben Hartard. I lead the solutions engineering team at Square. I've been at Square for about 4 years now. And today I want to discuss Square's developer platform, our technology ecosystem, and how that relates to payment security, specifically online e-commerce security. So the solutions engineering team at Square, we work with our most sophisticated merchants and partners, think Fortune 500 companies, enterprises, in leveraging Square's technology stack for complex API integrations, maybe technical feasibility analysis, security reviews, pretty much anything related to leveraging Square's technology stack for taking payments in both online and offline worlds. So for those not familiar with Square, right, we started off as that little iconic dongle that you plug into your phone. We started with small and micro-sized businesses that allowed them to take credit card payments anywhere on the go, and in many cases it was the first time that these smaller businesses had the ability to accept credit cards. We've evolved since then a little bit, but we continue to make all of our own first-party hardware. We now accept mag stripes. We've created an EMV and contactless reader, so for EMV chip cards, as well as NFC payments like Apple Pay and Android Pay. And we've developed our own stands for use with iPads to create a whole cohesive ecosystem of accepting payments. In terms of scale, Square processes over $50 billion worth of transactions in our 5 markets that we're active in: the United States, Canada, Japan, Australia, and the UK. And we're seeing some tremendous growth still, and we're only just beginning to get into the e-commerce space. But payments is what you're familiar with Square, but that's not all we are. Payments is the foundation of what we do, but we actually offer an entire ecosystem to our merchants and our partners. This ecosystem consists of the payments processing capabilities on first-party hardware, as well as a suite of tools built around a point of sale, so an entire application that these businesses are using on their mobile devices to operate their business. Additionally, we include other services related to invoicing, payments capabilities, and services that allow them to run their business, not just take payments and start their business. This includes dashboarding analytics tools, employee management tools, device management, location management, third-party ecosystem with APIs that allow other services to plug in. And finally, we're providing other financial services such as loans and capital, marketing tools, customer engagement tools, all built on the single ecosystem. So Square is no longer just a dongle. It's actually a full suite of tools for a business to operate online and offline, right? So a full setup of cash registers, barcode scanners, printers, everything you would possibly want to replace the traditional technology stack that have been operating at these brick and mortar locations for decades at this point. So Square is no longer just the traditional micro merchant and small business card reader. You can actually see us now in much larger chains. In this case, this is Corridor Coffee, a mixed-use food and beverage, full-service restaurant, quick service restaurant and bar located in downtown San Francisco. This is going to be a more common scene that you start to see as Square begins to move up market, work with larger and larger businesses, and businesses begin to accept and adopt to our ecosystem package to run and operate their whole business. So before I get into the security piece, I want to talk about Square's approach to platform. And this is going to be something completely different from what you're used to when you think of Square as that little dongle that plugs into your phone to take payments. So I like to joke with all of our partners and our merchants that Square accidentally built the most robust, secure, enterprise-grade payments platform by starting with small businesses. It's a little bit ironic, right? We started with small businesses, and we built a unified payments layer that includes a modern cloud-first architecture built for mobile-first use. We build and supply our own first-party encrypted hardware. So every bit of hardware, including that little dongle, our EMV and NFC readers, our stands, and any first-party peripherals we build are fully point-to-point hardware encrypted with our own encryption keys. What's great here is that this hardware, while it's plugged into commodity iOS and Android devices, it's available to all of our millions of merchants from big box retailers, Best Buy, Apple, Amazon, Staples, etc. But it contains the same enterprise-grade encryption that a true Fortune 500 enterprise company would need in a traditional payments solution. And finally, we built this all on a common infrastructure where we monitor all the fraud and risk and provide this analysis to our merchants. And what I mean by that is, again, in this common commerce layer, Square is a technology company at its core. We are building machine learning teams and applying our own technology stack to both the merchant and buyer side of this network of millions of not only merchants, but billions of transactions. And we're using this technology to identify fraud at the point of swipe or at the point of keying in for payments, and we're automatically providing this out to all of our merchants. Now, the irony here is that we built this little credit card reader that plugs into a phone, and we gave it to small business owners and micro merchants that don't understand security. They don't understand encryption. They don't understand PCI scope. They don't understand PII. Yet we gave them the ability to collect all that information in a secure way to process payments. This is really unheard of. But because of that, we're enabling a lot of developers now to leverage that same technology stack in their own solutions. Now, on top of this payments layer, what we're building is data attribution. So this is a little different from a traditional e-commerce provider, but we're going to obfuscate the complexity of the payments infrastructure, the hardware, the fraud, the risk. And we're going to allow you to attach data to it. So if you think about it, really a commerce transaction is simply just an agreement between a buyer and a seller with a bunch of metadata attached to it. What am I selling? Who am I selling it to? At what price? What taxes? What discounts? Where? What devices, right? So we envision a true commerce experience between just to be the collection of these data points attached to a payment. Then we expose this all through a set of unified APIs. So Square has APIs, we call them the Connect APIs, that include solutions for e-commerce, which I'm sure you're familiar with, as well as brick and mortar solutions. So the ability to actually build payment processing in to card readers in a secure manner. Now, Square also offers first-party solutions built on these APIs. The most common is commonly known as the Square point of sale. It's the free iOS and Android application available in the App Store and the Google Play Store that any merchant can download that allows them to take payments securely. But we're never going to build the best solution for every industry, and we're aware of that. So this is where it diverges a little bit maybe from your understanding of Square. We want to build an open ecosystem. We want to enable developers to leverage the same APIs that we've used to build our own first-party solutions to build your own first-party solutions, to offer these third-party solutions to our millions of merchants and allow you to do it securely. And we see a world in which the developers of our ecosystem, leveraging our secure APIs, are able to build a unique medical kiosk or a Drupal e-commerce site that doesn't just do e-commerce, but maybe does a bit of brick and mortar retail as well, based on some unique experiences you might come across with some of the merchants and retailers you're working with. So core to our platform strategy is, as I mentioned, our exposure of these platform APIs. We have two, as I already mentioned, APIs. One is a traditional e-commerce API. This is what you should be familiar with, right? The Braintrees, the Stripes, the Authorized.nets, the ability to embed payments into your own e-commerce solution, such as a Drupal page. But we also have the ability to do the exact same thing in a secure way with physical hardware. So leveraging the Square Reader, leveraging Apple Pay in a physical reader, EMV, NFC, and building it as a payment solution directly into the experiences you're building. So the obvious one here is e-commerce API, right? So you imagine building your own site, you build your own checkout flow, you can embed Square's APIs in there, you can customize the look, customize the feel, and own the entire checkout experience on your site. There's not real much going on here. You should all be pretty familiar with e-commerce. But point of sale API is unique. What if you can do the same thing, build your own interface, but then natively switch into an application running on that same device that communicates securely with the hardware, allows you to take EMV, NFC, magstripe payment, and then bring the user back into your checkout flow, right? Obfuscate all the complexity of PCI, of security, of encryption, of hardware into a single line of code that now allows you to enable these experiences. And of course, we have other APIs, as any true platform would have, around customer management, item inventories, employees, reporting, analytics. It's all the core APIs you would need to actually build a true commerce platform. And of course, all of these, again, are built in a secure way in a single unified API. So I think what you'll be most interested in is we've already gone and done this, right? So we worked with the commerce guys, and we actually built an integration with Drupal Commerce that already utilizes Square's e-commerce APIs. And this plugin's available. I believe it's free. It's available in the store at under Commerce Square. You can download it today. You can install it into your installation of Drupal Commerce. And you can start taking payments with Square for any merchant sites that you're building. So the 800-pound gorilla in the room is, how are you different from, and the first one's probably Stripe, or Braintree, or Authorize.net, but not really. How are you different from the thing we're already doing? We've been doing it 8 years now. I already integrated. It took me 10 minutes. I integrated, and I'm up and running. Why would I switch to Square? And the answer is, for payments, we're not. We're not different at all. We offer the exact same functionality. You can put Square into the site, and you can take payments in the exact same manner that you're doing it with Stripe or Braintree or any of these other providers. But where we do differ is on a few of these other things. So we have next day business deposits. This is a core to our platform, whether you do online payment or offline payment. If you take the payment right now, it'll be in the bank account by tomorrow morning. That's core to our infrastructure. We have the same, no commitments or contracts, basically the exact same pricing, no fees for refunds and chargebacks. Same security fraud that might be built into these other networks. I mentioned we have it in the online and offline world, but really where we differentiate are on the two bottom pieces around security and omni-channel. So omni-channel. What we're seeing is a trend towards businesses that want to offer a unified experience both online and offline. This is a quote from the CEO of Little Giants. It's a children's streetwear apparel company. They started online. Think Bonobos. Think Warby Parker. Think Casper. These are businesses that started in the digital age. They started online. They've only ever had e-commerce. Now they're switching to brick and mortar. They're trying to provide new experiences for their customer base, and they're trying to provide a unified experience to their customer base. And it's the kind of commentary around we see everyone else is starting a physical store location, and we need that to be part of our brand as well. So businesses are coming to Square and to our partners and saying we want a true omni-channel solution, and we know that Square offers both the online and offline piece, whether it's through e-commerce APIs or physical point of sales or brick and mortar solutions built on the physical presence. But the second piece here is around security. And I think that's what you all are most interested in hearing. So PCI, quick raise of hands. Are you familiar with PCI? Have you heard of PCI? So this is a fun one. So PCI stands for Payment Card Industry, and there's DSS, Data Security Standards. And this is a set of guidelines or standards that were created by the 5 major networks to actually self-police themselves. So there's no such thing as a true PCI certification. It doesn't exist. The government hasn't stepped in and said, this is how PII and credit card data needs to be handled. They're self-regulated. They said, you know what, we're going to create this council, we're going to create a set of rules that govern how organizations and merchants are going to safely, securely accept, store, process, and transmit cardholder data to prevent fraud and breaches, right? And we've seen and heard of things like Target, right? Most recently Whole Foods and data breaches. And this is the whole point of these guidelines, is to stop those breaches from occurring, to make sure everyone's following the right technology standards. So if you're using any of the traditional e-commerce players and providers, you have different options on how you actually might interface with PCI. And really what it comes down to is when you're building a solution, do you have access to the credit card information? And the vast majority of the time the answer is yes, you do, even only temporarily. Now what's unique about Square is that first, Square is the merchant of record. This is 100% different than every other payment facilitator out there. Different than Stripe, different than Braintree, different than a traditional merchant acquired bank. Square is the merchant of the transaction. If you actually look at a transaction done by Lululemon, who uses Square for all of their external offsite events, you'll see that on the statement of the credit card, it's actually SQ Lululemon. Now what's interesting about this is it means that Square actually owns the relationship with the banks, with the partners, and we own the security behind the deployment with Lululemon. We now sponsor their PCI compliance, which means by leveraging our technology stack, we remove them entirely from the audit scope. We remove them from their requirement to also maintain an audit and maintain checklists with PCI councils. And most importantly, Square designs our platform specifically such that merchants cannot store, process, or transmit cardholder data. And now anyone who's actually done an integration with an external provider or e-commerce player probably has seen a form like this. You probably built a form like this. And you say, no, I don't actually transmit anything to my backend server. I don't actually store any data. I know I'm not supposed to. I tokenize it and I send it off. But even if you put your own form elements on the page and you accept the credit card data here and you fire it off to a RESTful API, you're in PCI scope. Simple as that. If your server in any way is touching, either on the client side or the server side, PCI scope data, you are in PCI scope, and you are responsible for the attestation of PCI compliance for not only your platform and your merchants. So how does Square do this securely? And this is similar maybe to how some options are for other providers, but the uniqueness of Square is that we don't allow you to do it any other way. We don't offer a RESTful API to just send us credit card data. We won't allow that. So what we do is we use dynamic iframe injection. So if you look at a normal credit card form, you'll see that you have your fields, but really we only care about 4 of them. We care about the PAN, the credit card information, expiration date, the zip code, as well as the CVV number, so the security code on the card. So what we do, using JavaScript, much like any provider, right? We have our development partners put JavaScript on the page, and then build form elements that are going to be replaced by the JavaScript when it's loaded on the page. So in this case, they could just put div elements. They tell us what elements we're going to end up replacing and how to style these elements. Square will then, once the page is loaded, we will dynamically replace those items with our own iframes, and then we'll be able to, upon submission of the form, retrieve the data across these iframes that are all on our servers directly, create a token, and then send the token back to the calling, the developer to then ultimately submit an API request. So in this world, it's a little bit nuanced, right? You're like, well, I'm already doing tokenization. You should ask yourself this question. At any point in time from the code on my website, can I see a credit card information? If the answer is yes, the answer is you are 100% in PCI scope. In a solution like this, and there are other providers that do something similar, in a solution like this, the developer cannot use JavaScript or any other means to actually see the contents of those fields. They cannot accidentally retrieve the credit card information, and they cannot store that information or otherwise programmatically tokenize or charge these cards. Everything has to be done through the iframes. So once they receive the nonce, they submit a call, and at this point, they're able to actually transact. Now this method is nearly identical to a modern RESTful endpoint. We offer the same delayed capture, authorization, customer attribution, itemization support, as well as card on file support using the nonce. Really the only difference is on that first collection of the tokenization information. Now what's unique, I guess, kind of what I was getting at there is, again, we only provide you this ability to do this tokenization. There is no direct endpoint. There's no way to use Square's platform or APIs in any way where you have the credit card information and you send it to our servers. And that's by design. Now we can do the exact same thing with physical cards. So what if we had the ability from our website to connect to a device, take a payment in a tokenized manner, and then charge it? Well, we could do the exact same thing. Here's an example for a website for an iOS device. We could just build a basic JSON request, including how much we want to charge and maybe what kind of tender types we want to accept. And we just change the URL. So we're in a browser, we change the URL, to a URL that Square has worked with Apple or Google to register. At this point, the iOS and Android device will switch into our application. It'll load up a payment. It'll take the payment, and then it'll redirect back to your web calling application. Here's an example on Android. Again, it's just a hypertext href with the encoded parameters of what you want to charge. We'll switch out to the locally installed app on the iOS or Android device. We'll take a payment, and we'll redirect back. Again, we're allowing developers and merchants to take payments from their own experiences without exposing them in any way to sensitive credit card information. In fact, there's no ability for them to communicate not only with our hardware or our backend servers to even retrieve this information if you wanted to. So the advantage here is, again, we could take advantage, we could use our hardware for card-present transactions, which, by the way, on average, a card-not-present e-commerce transaction is 2.9 plus 30. That's an average without a negotiated rate. An average for a card-present is 2.75 flat, and a card-present can be negotiated down to as low as 1.6% with no additional fee on, versus a card-not-present, which is usually in the 2-something range. We can accept every payment method, and of course, we're creating a true omnichannel solution. So online and offline payments can all sync together. In case anyone's actually interested in taking a look at these things, we have a Stack Overflow tag. Check out Square Connect. We have a Slack channel you can join. So the Stack Overflow is Square-Connect. We have a Slack channel, squ.re/Slack. It'll actually be a form you can fill out. We'll then contact you and get you access to a Slack channel where you can have direct contact with any of our team to discuss some of these solutions here. And we have a public site, a seller community at sellercommunity.com. And this is a community for all types of commerce in Square, not just our developers, but it is available. And ultimately, or finally, our developer site for all this information is available at developers.squareup.com. And you'll see documentation for the ability to take e-commerce as well as brick and mortar payments through any of our APIs. Thanks. That's all I have for the lightning portion of it. I don't know if we're doing QA at the end or anything like that, but
Go for it.
Yeah. So I'll open it to QA, and I can discuss any more of the security-related topics, the Square-related topics, PCI, pretty much anything that was discussed here. I'm happy to answer questions on, and I'm pretty well versed in all of this. Cool.
Thank you. While we're waiting for this to start up and get the slides up, how many folks are all D8 dev now? Like, you don't touch D7 anymore? All right, just a few. How many people are doing some D8, but then also doing D7 support still? One more. And then how many people are all D7, no D8? Okay, it looks like the more majority of folks.
and mortar world seeing billions of transactions in cards, not just in e-com. So our scoring metrics are the e-com world, sure, but we're also seeing the buyer and seller side, the merchant, the consumer, and the buyer side, all from our brick and mortar network. And we're using the same signals from physical card purchases, the same card fingerprinting from physical devices, alongside of our CMP e-commerce piece, which is really unique because the vast majority of payments facilitators only have an e-com world, and all of their fraud metrics are only related to the cards they can see on the e-commerce channel. And then it's just the standard machine learning and backend technologies we're applying to that data set. And then finally, we have the last layer, which is traditional for the networks, where we work with Visa, MasterCard, American Express, the banks. We actually have several merchant acquirer banks, Chase, Wells Fargo, and a few others internationally, where we're constantly working with them to provide our data sets, receive data sets from them for whitelisting, blacklisting, and applying it all to the algorithms as well.
Great, thanks.
Got a question for these guys.
Is there over here to be on the audio?
Is there anything that you guys would like to mention that we maybe didn't cover? I know you guys are both really deeply involved with security modules and security practices in Drupal. What did we miss?
Well, one of the exciting things that's going on with the key module is we're adding the ability to use it for overriding any configuration in your system. So ideally, a module would support and even require as a dependency the key module. For instance, the encrypt module in D8 requires key, but the SMTP module does not. So the way you can get around entering your password, your SMTP password, and having it stored in the database, one way to do it would be save it in a settings.php override. Another way is to use our new override system within key, which allows you to then store the key anywhere, including on an offsite service like Blocker or Townsend Security's AKM server. So it provides more flexibility about where you're storing that kind of sensitive data.
In playing around with it, it'll literally override any config anywhere. And again, this is D8, so as you start to transition into D8 development, it's all UI driven, so it's great. It allows you to select through. And in testing, we were able to even store config like site name in the key module. So you can now override any config anywhere.
The only config you can't override, I said it, so you can't override keys or key override configuration, because that would get a little too meta.
Got anything you'd want to add?
I mean, I think like auditing is really a big thing that isn't discussed nearly enough. I tend to think that you need things like site audit and security review and things like that to go through and kind of try to give you some recommendations about where you might be falling down. Logging, all the logging-based modules are huge, because if you get hacked, you need to have a paper trail to go back and actually scan and check. I think I'd like to talk about maybe some emerging technologies a little bit.
Yep.
I think I'm working on a sandbox module for Vault, for HashiCorp's Vault, that you can use as like a key storage plugin to integrate with third-party Vault, if you guys are familiar with that. But and then something like, for logging, using something like Elasticsearch as a backend is really good, because it has all the Logstash and Kibana integration that you could use to do these really great dashboards. So if you're getting hacked or you're seeing a large uptick in traffic, you could be reporting on that, have some really nice charts and graphs to see that very easily. And it's really good for stakeholders as well, that maybe might not be quite as technical. And then hooking and wiring in things like OpsGenie to get some kind of monitoring going on is usually really easy on top of that. So those are the things I think that I would throw in there. My general recommendation whenever I give types of talks like this is usually like really understand the problems that you're trying to solve.
Yeah.
So don't take just the ideas of all these modules and recommendations and just install them and hope that you're secure.
Mm-hmm.
Try to really focus on what problems that you need to solve for your Drupal instance or your Drupal site and your full stack.
Right. that's a good point. There is no silver bullet. I know we kind of talked a lot about encryption and key management and stuff like that, but there is no silver bullet. We'll be the first to say that. You need to take a defense in depth approach to security. So there's a lot of different things that you need to consider. But also to one of the points that Adam made about logging, you also got to be monitoring those logs. It's no good if you're collecting the logs and just like putting them under your on your desk and not ever paying attention to them. I believe it might have been the Target breach a while back where it was actually detected via logs, but no one just was paying attention to them, so the breach happened. I saw a stat recently that something like 80 or 90% of data breaches could have been protected had logging been properly monitored.
And one of the things to note along the lines, like Adam was saying, is store your logs elsewhere or install some of these logging modules. By default, Drupal caps the amount of logs that it will store in the database. And that can be a really bad thing because if somebody's doing like a giant DDoS attack or something where it's hammering your system and creating all of these errors, the original error or the original infiltration that was detected on the logs could get wiped out within a matter of seconds if you just let Drupal have its way, and it'll keep the logging curtailed. So make sure you not only enable some of these logging modules, but make sure that you're not using just core out of the box Drupal logging, because you could lose some of those important logs in there.
It's like in the movies where they cut the security cameras and then
Right. Right.
Well, is there a solution to do longer term?
There are modules that will allow you to do longer, to extend the, I
I mean,
believe.
syslog is in core.
Yeah.
I think by default it enables it in the database, but syslog writes it to the file system of the server that you're running.
Right.
So, and most of the time, a lot of these tools that are friendly to storing things like Elasticsearch can actually read off of those log files themselves. So
Yeah.
you enable syslog and you could just wire it together with whatever other tools that you want to put into your infrastructure.
Yeah. So out of the box, the DB logging is what's enabled. Syslog's there. There are also modules that'll extend the DB logging out to, I believe it's like 1 million records or something like that. But FYI, your database is going to get big really quick if you start to allow that many logs happening there. So it's good for those burst attacks, but still have something else that is pulling that log data away from your site so that you're not just bogging down your database or your file server with tons and tons of log files.
One more practical thing that I can add is, if possible, I mean, Chris mentioned if somebody gets a hold, is able to execute arbitrary PHP on your server through, say, the devel module. One way to prevent that is just to not have the devel module on your production server. So if you're using Composer, for instance, Composer install -- no dev, and you have devel listed as a dev dependency, it won't get installed. Use the configuration split module so that the configuration for devel never goes up to the production server, and you just keep that kind of thing. That's never going to be a vector for attack because it doesn't exist on the production server.
And something, unless something's changed recently, syslog won't work on Pantheon. I
Correct.
don't know if with anybody else, but I know this.
Correct. Yep. So, and that's again part of the thing to check with your hosting provider to make sure that you've got a solution in place with them, or they've got a solution for you for some of these. Syslog not working on theirs. Pantheon may offer an alternative solution that you could index it somewhere else. It's worth talking with them through that rather than just, and this goes back to the slide we had earlier, just because your hosting provider says, I'm X compliant, doesn't mean you are. It just means that their systems are. How you use those systems can put you wildly out of compliance right away, and it's up to you as the builder and the maintainer to make sure that your site is really compliant.
I did think of one other thing that I thought might be cool to mention, sort of in the emerging space. One thing that's been on my mind is blockchain. Like, I think that has that concept, just has like a tremendous potential in the security realm, most notably for data integrity, which is really important. And I think when you get hacked, you know, really bad things can occur, and it's unpredictable. You could get lots of really bad things can happen. So having kind of stronger data integrity principles is obviously advantageous, but I think that might be something worth exploring as like a future solution. I'm not sure what's going on right now in the space for that, but I think that might be something coming.
Yeah, I could almost guarantee you that it's going to be something really big. We were at DrupalCon Baltimore, and there was I think a BOF. I didn't quite make it. I don't know if any of you guys did, but
There was a
BOF
session in Vienna as well, I believe,
Yeah.
on the blockchain. And one thing about that is to note is that when you look at these regulations that you're going to be under, GDPR and FISMA and HIPAA and all the different ones, they are a very low bar. The government moves slow, regulation bodies move slow. And so just because you may be compliant doesn't mean that you should just, you know, pat yourself on the back and walk away from your keyboard. Things like blockchain won't be described in a HIPAA requirement. It won't be described in PCI or anything else. However, when utilized, you can actually be above and beyond those regulations, which then allow you to be that much more secure. So, you know, some of these emerging technologies, it's worth looking at as extra layers of protection. So.
Any other questions? We're a little bit over. One thing before we break, if this was kind of interesting to you, Chris and myself will be doing a presentation in about 20 minutes on the future of internet security, and
we'll kind of be looking at trends now that then project into the future and what that means for the sites that we build in the future. So if you want to continue the security conversation, come find us and we'll keep it going.
And thanks for coming. I think these are fun.
No, not the same room. It's in Eshelman, I believe. It's like the building that's attached
Go
here.
down the flight and over.
Yes, I believe that's the one. Thank you.